I am Dr. Jessie Hargrove, and I remember the day that Dr. King died, April 4th, 1968.
It was really a sad day for all. When Walter Cronkite came over CBS, I think that was an interruption in the programming, and he mentioned that, he stated that Dr. King had been assassinated. And at that point, they didn't have like a lot of information on what occurred that day, but we did get the full story the rest of the day.
Direct from our newsroom in Washington, in color, this is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite and Russ Hodge in Memphis, Tennessee, Dan Rather in New York, Bernard Kalb in Saigon, Marvin Kalb in Wellington, New Zealand, and Bert Quint in Quezon, South Vietnam.
Good evening. Dr. Martin Luther King, the apostle of nonviolence in the civil rights movement, has been shot to death in Memphis, Tennessee. Police have issued an all-points bulletin for a well-dressed young white man seen running from the scene. Officers also reportedly chased and fired on a radio-equipped car containing 2 white men. Dr. King was standing on the balcony of a second-floor hotel room tonight when, according to a companion, a shot was fired from across the street. In the friend's words, the bullet exploded in his face. Police, who have been keeping a close watch over the Nobel Peace Prize winner because of Memphis' turbulent racial situation, were on the scene almost immediately. They rushed the 39-year-old Negro leader to a hospital where he died of a bullet wound in the neck. Police said they found a high-powered hunting rifle about a block from the hotel, but it was not immediately identified as the murder weapon. Mayor Henry Loeb has reinstated the dusk-to-dawn curfew he imposed on the city last week when a march led by Dr. King erupted in violence.
One thing that I tell my students at Philadelphia College, they want to know, when they ask me a question, how old are you, Dr. Hargrove? I say I was born 1 year before Brown versus the Board of Education. Have you heard of Brown versus Board of Education? Some of them say, no, it's over that. We're going to take the time right now. Google it. Google it? Yes, Google it. And I need one person at the board to bring it up on Google. So they said, oh, you're born, and that was 1954. What was Brown versus Board of Education about? And see, because they were saying the Central High crisis, the Little Rock Nine, they think that was something that happened a long time ago. And they don't understand that it was a recent 1957. So 1957 was not that long ago, when 1968, Dr. King was assassinated April 4th. So you tell them, how many years was that from 57 to 68? 11 years, you see? And so you remember when you were 11 years old, now you're in college now, and so forth. So it's making things relevant to this population. I think that churches will also play an important role with educating, because there are only 3 institutions: the institution of the church, institution of the schools, that's pre-K all the way to 12th, and then that includes baccalaureate degrees and post-baccalaureate degrees for getting your law degree and so forth. So that's education. So the church provides the spiritual background for you to understand thou should not do these type of things that you're doing. stealing and so forth. And then schooling educates you to understand about your moral and your academic background. Then if you don't learn in those two, the third institution is the penal institution. That penalizes you by taking your livelihood away from you and placing you in jail or imprisonment. And so what we have to do is to, these two of the church, we have, that's why do you think African Americans met so much at church? It was nothing much to do during that time. Now you got all of these movie theaters and you got all of these activities, arcades and people's homes and so forth. So the church was a meeting place. That is no longer the case, but we still have access to children who can put on programs for youth at churches, at community schools and so forth. And then you have the schools where the PTA, we can be involved in that as parents, as students, because we should have that PTA popping because of our youth. And so if we begin to reinstill the values back into the church and the schools as it was years ago, I think our moral obligation, our moral knowledge will increase. Because right now there seems to be a decadence of truth, of moral platitudes. And we got to find a way by reinstituting, rebuilding the structure to those two institutions, because that third institution is competing. That's the prison, the penal institution.
If we just start there, then the social problems will take care of themselves.
Yes.
Like the violence would stop.
Yes.
The education, everything else would fall into place.
Right. I like what they were doing with the Daisy Bates and Martin Luther King with the remembrance of the crosses that there, and that needs to be in everyone's conversation as they are talking to the youth. And I don't know if many of them have visited, but that's something that we can visit with our King Commission, with our youth, and have and talk about why there is a need for our program. And so that program that you're doing on the 4th, I think you said Romeo and Mr. Miller. Mr. Miller. And I know of him from New Orleans because I went to Dillard University, and I'm so proud of him. He started out selling tapes, CDs out of the trunk of his car, and he made it to Hollywood. And so you can get out of a situation, a predicament, if you begin to utilize your other talents, as Mr. Miller did. And what is that name they call him?
Master P.
Master P. Yeah. Master P. Yeah, I knew of him because I knew of a teacher who knew him. Yeah, they always referred to him Miller. Yeah, Master P. Yes. And so if we can continue with the programs like the King Commission is doing, I think that we will do ourselves a great justice with our new generation of students. By the way, they're the DMG, the Deuce Millennium Generation. The DMG started school in pre-kindergarten in 2001 when they were 4 years old. They were born in '97, right after Generation X. You began to see that Generation X, and now came the DMG, the Deuce Millennium Generation, and they are very much social media conscious. And this marching, first of all, they don't enjoy talking to a lot of people. They enjoy writing. They enjoy reading. They enjoy using their camera. You know, the social skills, I must say, are not as apt as a previous generation, but they are brilliant. They are brilliant thinkers. And so if we could use some of those skills to educate others, and all we need to do is to get their attention. And getting their attention means doing what the M.L. King Commission has started and sought to do by having these speakers that will pull them out of their comfort zone, because they've heard of Master P, you know, and he dresses the role now, by the way, and you know, and so I think of him as a role model for the youth, and his son Romeo. So proud of him as well. It is. It's a different battle because the marches are not as prevalent. The involvement of the population is not there. So social media has become the way that we view what's going on in our nation today. As you remember with the Rodney King situation a year ago, you began to see, and the knee on the neck, what the students were doing, the population, they are recording now a lot of that, because now we were lucky with the Rodney King that someone looked out their window. There were not those phones, mobile phones that we had. They had a real camera, and we're able to get that and to see police brutality at its commonness. It is so it was so common that 20 police officers could take out their batons and take turns beating up Rodney King. Thank goodness that camera was there. So the same thing that you found with George Floyd and Eric Garner of New York, you know, with people saying, Michael Brown of Missouri, same thing, Tamir Rice. You begin to see all of these individuals, you know, Aubrey, when you look at all of them, what is the common link? It's a different way of fighting for civil rights. And that way is video and showing people what actually is happening in America. Why are these police being so brutal to a certain population? So you have to fight it a little differently. And what we are supposed to be doing is when we have these lectures, we're supposed to show these clips as we're talking, but we're still entertaining people talking off of the cuff rather than visually showing them as a lecture discussion what's going on. So we're going to have to shift to lecture discussions with visual aids of showing what actually happened over time and so forth. So we pay these multi-billion-dollar speakers, that's what we should be expecting, to change their method of delivery of the information. By the Dr. King. In fact, we were so much involved in making a difference that they awarded me, the King Commission, with the Drum Major Award, the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drum Major Award, because we were so much involved in our community, in our state, and nationally with Coretta Scott King, who was very much involved in the issues in the state of Arizona of this holiday bill. And her daughter, Yolanda, was coming there along with with Malcolm X's daughter to do a play to show that, because people were thinking that they were at odds with each other, but they weren't. And this play that they had written together was designed to show harmony and peace and on one accord. We had our ecumenical church services for Dr. Martin Luther King, with all of the synagogues, the churches, all of the mosques. Everybody came together to celebrate Dr. King holiday and the work that Dr. King did. And it was a lot of camaraderie that was going on with people being involved and people making a difference and people marching and having programs primarily that talked every week. It not only happened in January, but it continued throughout the 365 days and even leap years, celebrating the work of Dr. King, of how do you admit students to college? How do you, fair housing? What is it that must be done to stop the violence? As you know, the Reginald Denny situation was going on during that time. The Rodney King situation was going on during this era. The O.J. Simpson issue was coming up and was being talked about. And so there was a need for a Kingian approach, Dr. King, to bring clarity into people's thoughts about this new society. We were moving away from the black and white society of the 1960s, and civil rights had brought that about. And now we were moving into a tri-ethnic society of now Hispanics begin to come into through bilingual education, and they wanted a difference in their lives. And we knew that that Bilingual Education Act was, if you spoke a language other than English, why are you being discriminated against and not having a job? So the Hispanics began to join in with the African Americans to make a difference. And that's from the 1970s to the 1980s. The 1980s began to see a pluralistic society, a multicultural society of now Asian Americans began to join in and talk about we are part of the fabric of this society. They're calling us the model minority, but we still have needs that must be met and we are asking for treatment that similar to any other person. Don't just leave us out saying that we're the model minority because we're Asian Americans, we make high on tests. We have a lot of needs. We need a cultural center as well to reinforce our needs, our culture, our behavior. And so now we move from this multicultural society of the 1980s to the 1990s of a pluralistic society, and now Native Americans begin to join into the fabric of this society. And we move from there where with 450 Native American nations, they call them tribes, began to assert themselves and to say we are part of the fabric. They went back to their native names and stopped being called the names that they gave them, like they called them the Papagos, and they were the Hana'atha nation, the Hana'atha nation. And so they wanted to be respected. Then came the 2000s we entered, where women were saying, we're being paid less than men. On a dollar, a woman was making 60 cents for every dollar that a male made. Discrimination based on gender. And so as we moved beyond we moved into that diversified society, and now women began to assert themselves and join into the fabric of what makes this society unique. We moved into the gay, the lesbian, the homosexual, the transgender populations. And that's where we're at today. The movement for inclusion. We no longer talk about that it was it's an inclusive society where everyone has the right to exist, to belong, and to contribute to the fabric of what makes the society America. And Dr. King was the force behind bringing all this movement under one umbrella.
Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
The day that Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated was probably one of those pivotal moments in my life. It's like remembering when President John F. Kennedy was shot, maybe the birth of one of my children, all three of my children. It's one of those days that I will never forget. But the day was like, I was a junior in college, attended Philander Smith College. And it was a normal day as the day started. And I don't remember exactly what class I was in, but unlike today with social media, the word just, it came out. And it was almost like a dark cloud came over the whole college. Even at that moment, we were anticipating what we might do to continue to live out his dream. And so it was so much activity on campus. I'm not sure, I can't say. I do know classes were canceled for the evening, because back in those days we didn't have a lot of evening classes, but it was almost like school was out and we were talking to one another as students. Let me use a couple of scales. Of course, the first emotion was just plain doubt. No, it can't be. It was just not Dr. Martin Luther King, not just in Memphis. And we had a lot of, and still today, have a lot of students from Memphis. And many of us, and I was a political science major, so I've been kind of keeping up with his work and knowing what he was doing for the garbage men in Memphis. The mood was no, it can't be. Then it went from no, it can't be, that it's happened, it went straight, well, I won't say straight. For many of us, we were just mad. We were just mad. What can we do? We just wanted to express our feelings about our leader who had been assassinated. In 1968, racism was so prevalent that for me, I came from Lebanon, Tennessee, to Philander. Remember, the Voting Rights Act had just been passed in 1965. And so, but here in the state of Arkansas, you still had the separate entities. At the time, you could go to this one restaurant, and it may be famous, y'all may know about on 9th Street, or it was on 7th Street, which you had one kitchen and 2 entries. You had places where African Americans had businesses, and for the white customers, they served them in air conditioning. They served the blacks where it wasn't air conditioning. It was a lot going on. The racism was so thick. We were so proud of all the advances that Dr. King had made, and that was a spirit that and what many people forget. He was headed toward the Poor People's March in D.C., and that's what I keep remembering, that he was headed toward a positive peace to bring all God's people together. I just want to say, listen, I was a college junior, and you know, my son always talked to me about that. I was not 25. I don't think my frontal lobe was right where it should have been. But as I look back, I spoke in chapel the next day, and it was a rousing speech. I don't remember a word I said. All I do remember is that one of the teachers got on me because what I said was so volatile. I guess I look back on that time and that 24 hours from one day to the next, that I still had energy in me that said the volatility of race relations is part of who I am. And so that's what I would say to people: be who you are. I'm a child of the 60s. I've run for public office. I want to make a difference. You ought to want to make a difference. Think about yourself. Think about what you can do. It may just be the person next door. And last, I'd say, be a 360 person. Look to see who lives in front of you, who lives on both sides of you, who lives behind you. Make sure you're in contact with those folks. I'm glad you asked me that. I'm so glad. You see this t-shirt I'm wearing today? I wore this intentionally. Just vote. I wore this intentionally. I intentionally wore my cap, that I'm a veteran. In other words, I've given service to the country. What we can connect with our young folks today is the importance of the vote. Because when you're able to vote, you can make a difference in the society you live in, no matter where it is. And with today's understanding, I think young people, not only that, and that's more of a governmental piece. But the other part I want to say to young folks, and a good friend of mine said this to me, is get some gumption about yourself. Lift yourself up. Lift other people up. Don't fall into a mode to where someone has told you can't do something. I grew up in the age where they not only told us we couldn't do something, they said we couldn't do it. I was a number of firsts in a lot of places, which has nothing to do with this interview per se, but Dr. King made that happen. He opened doors for us. Doors are open for you. There's a positive attitude. One of the things, if you ever hear me speak, I do not start off with the negative statistics about the young folks in America. Black, white, red, doesn't make any difference. I talk about that 95% that's doing a good job. The Dr. Martin Luther King Commission here in Arkansas stresses that same thing. Let's talk to the folks who are on the boat, who are also on the bus, who are doing positive things. You're going to have negativity with you all the time, but let's not stress that. Young folks need to be in a situation where they're making a difference with themselves, with their family, and not the last part, but it's a connectional piece. If you got an uncle, you got a brother, you got a cousin, you got a mother, you got a father that's having struggles, deal with them. Talk to them. What can I do to help you? And I say that to say this, that the youth of today and what the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Commission is trying to do is to connect them. There are so many outlets. You have, it's almost like the song, you got the whole world in your hands here. You got so many places that you can get on your phone and look for things that are coming to you. So I'm just saying, wherever you live, in the state of Arkansas, in the United States, in the world, try to find where you connect, but also connect with who you are. One of the things I stress, and it's Tiffany knows that, is my son, both sons and my daughter are very active in what they do and where they are. And that's what I want to say to the young folks today. Find out who you are. See what skills you have. You may have a skill I don't know about, one that you don't know, but investigate yourself. Find out what makes you happy. When she asked me to come do this interview, I make a living talking. So when she asked me to do this, I know that's part of my skill set. So find out what your skill set is. And if it's something to do, and I believe in this hand-eye consideration, if it's something you do with your hands good, I got a grandson, he's in civil engineering, he does good with them numbers and hands and things like that. My daughter-in-law, my grandbaby is in communications, they do well. But I'm just saying, we stress them to find out where their talent is and to use it for the benefit of those around them. That's what Dr. King wanted us to do. He wanted us to benefit not just ourselves, but if you can't benefit nobody else, it's just like living in a cave for the rest of your life. This is debatable. And you hear it all the time. People say, the children are our future. I don't say that. I say the children are our present. Because if we don't lift you up now, then what are we going to do? Yes, I feel good. I go to the store, not intentionally, but I try to speak to young folks. A lot of people are afraid of them. I try to speak to them, and 99% of the time, they speak back. I really feel good about where they are. I think they're going to discover ways we won't have cancer. Medicine changes every 75 days, they say. I think some of the infrastructure that's going on, they're going to be part of that. I feel, if I didn't feel good, I'd go get in the cave myself. But I feel strongly today that the Martin Luther King Jr. Commission and my attitude about what young folks are doing and all of our attitudes, we're going to say, you young people make a difference. Find yourself and let us help you do it. If he were not in jail because of some protest that he was doing, I think he would be trying to mobilize families, trying to mobilize communities, trying to mobilize individuals. I love organizational structure, but ain't nothing like kinfolks. Ain't nothing like folks you grew up with. Ain't nothing like people you know and love. So I think that's what Dr. King was doing. I think that's what he would be doing today. I think he'd be trying to mobilize us to be who we are so we can help other folks make a difference.
Good evening. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, 39 years old and a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and the leader of the nonviolent civil rights movement in the United States, was assassinated in Memphis tonight. A sniper's bullet cut down Dr. King as he stood on a hotel balcony in Memphis. Within an hour, Dr. King was dead. That happened at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. The nation was shocked. President Johnson expressed horror and then postponed his trip to Hawaii until tomorrow.
Governor Buford Ellington has called out 4,000 National Guardsmen. And police report that the murder has touched off sporadic acts of violence in a Negro section of the city. In a nationwide television address, President Johnson expressed the nation's shock.
America is shocked and saddened by the brutal slaying tonight of Dr. Martin Luther King. I ask every citizen to reject the blind violence that has struck Dr. King, who lived by nonviolence.
Dr. King had returned to Memphis only yesterday, determined to prove that he could lead a peaceful mass march in support of striking sanitation workers, most of whom are Negro. The nation's largest Negro community Men, women, and children poured into the streets. They appeared dazed. Many were crying. A young Negro said, Dr. King didn't really have to go back to Memphis. Maybe he wanted to prove something.
After President Kennedy was assassinated, Lyndon Baines Johnson was his vice president. So he took on the reins of president. John F. Kennedy had signed a lot of education laws into play for inner city youth, African Americans mainly, inner city youth. And that initiative was, if you want to go to college, you can go free. If you want to get an education, it's free. So one of his initiatives was called Model Cities. And well, when Lyndon Baines Johnson came on, he called John F. K's initiative Model Cities. And the reasoning for calling it Model Cities is because from 68 until about 70, inner city youth had torn the cities down. You know, it burned down churches, houses, stores. There were about 8 cities across the United States: Chicago, the Watts riots, Chicago, Michigan. They had burned and torn the cities down. So President Johnson, his initiative was to revitalize the cities. In order to do this, he had to offer some things to the inner city youth. So Model Cities was one, and one of the initiatives was a tuition-free education. So here in Little Rock, I enrolled in the program. It was called Model Cities, and it was a teacher program for African Americans, and I received my teacher education free. We attended school during the evenings, and we worked as paraprofessionals in the school district during the day. They interviewed us. Um, we were interviewed, and some of the questions in the interview was, would you participate in a riot? Would you march? And, you know, if you said, yes, I've marched, then you probably wouldn't have, you know, gotten a job in that program. But I worked in that program for about three and a half years and received my BA degree in education. And so, you know, from that, you know, I went on. 1968, Dr. King, before he was assassinated, was kind of like the light at the beginning and the end of the tunnel. So with him being assassinated, that left everybody in the middle of the tunnel. So what do we do now? And of course, there were other leaders, you know, that came on with their thing, but it kind of left people in the dark, especially youth, especially young people. So it was different for a while. And the government, you know, was busy again trying to remodel cities. President Johnson was busy trying to restore peace in the country, remodel cities, and so on. And I read one of his quotes that, and he said, if I were a black youth in the inner cities, I would be mad too. And, he kind of sided with the youth, but that still was not an excuse for inner city kids to tear the cities down because we had to live in these neighborhoods. And they burned down our stores, churches, ran all the white residents out. They burned and tore down everything that they could get their hands on. And that happened across the nation. That was April 4th, 1968. I was probably on my way to work.
What do you remember?
Everybody was, everything was quiet for a while. Um, I cried, and we just didn't know what was going to happen after that. But everything was quiet for a moment. And there was a stillness across the land. There was a stillness, a quietness for a moment, until, again, uh, people started protesting again. And some of the leaders even said, well, we tried it Dr. King's way, the nonviolent way, so now we're going to try it our way. And so that only lasted, for a while. And the president had to send the National Guard out in some of the cities. And Little Rock rioted, and, too, but it wasn't as harsh as it was in other cities across the country.
Well,
I think he would be most concerned about our young men dying in the streets. I think he would be most concerned about our youth are being turned off to education at third grade. I think he would be concerned about. Um, I think he would be concerned about people not having decent houses to live in. He'd be concerned about the homeless. He'd be concerned about education. It's basically the same thing. I think those would be his concerns, like, hey, are you not your brother's keeper? Could you all not have talked this out other than, killing up each other, shooting and killing up each other? He'd be concerned about the music, some of the lyrics in the music that our youth are hearing. So he would have a lot of concern. Okay, so the Central High crisis was in 1957. So laws were passed saying that, okay, now we've integrated Central High, and you uh, African Americans were provided the opportunities to attend white schools in Little Rock. So I attended George Washington Carver. That's the old George Washington Carver from the East End, and the East End is now called East Village. So you may not know it as East End, but they're calling it East Village now. But anyway, I was in the sixth grade in I was in sixth grade in 1959, sixth grade. So my mother filled out the paperwork, and I was assigned to Forest Heights. Me and one other student, we were assigned to Forest Heights Middle School or Forest Heights Junior High. The other two African American junior highs there was only one other African American junior high in Little Rock, and that was Dunbar. So I was all excited about Central High. Well, I can go to a white school too. I'm smart enough to go. I had, good test scores and all like that. And so my mother signed me up to go to Forest Heights. So two of us was assigned to Forest Heights. We were the first two African Americans in Little Rock to be assigned to that school. So the school year ended and summer came. So during the summer, white people, and I was raised up out in the East End Project, white people found out where I lived and they started driving by, breaking out windows, and doing what was called race rioting. And so my mother instantly pulled me from Forest Heights because we were kind of afraid that, something would happen to me. They would drive by the house, yell out um, racial slurs. And so my mother pulled me from Forest Heights and I attended Dunbar. That was an all black school. So that was the end of my integration stint there at Forest Heights Junior High.
For those of you who are black and are tempted to be filled with hatred and mistrust of the injustice of such an act against all white people, I would only say that I can also feel in my own heart the same kind of feeling. I had a member of my family killed, but he was killed by a white man. But we have to make an effort in the United States. We have to make an effort to understand, to get beyond or go beyond these rather difficult times. My favorite poem, my favorite poet was Aeschylus. He once wrote, "Even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God." What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black. Return home to say a prayer for the family, Martin Luther King. Yeah, it's true. But more importantly, to say a prayer for our own country, which all of us love. A prayer for understanding and that compassion of which I spoke. Martin Luther King dedicated his life to love and to justice between fellow human beings. He died in the cause of that effort. In this difficult day, in this difficult time for the United States, it's perhaps well to ask what kind of a nation we are and what direction we want to move in. For those of you who are black, considering the evidence evidently is that there were white people who were responsible, you can be filled with bitterness and with hatred and a desire for revenge. We can move in that direction as a country, in greater polarization, black people amongst blacks and white amongst whites, filled with hatred toward one another. Or we can make an effort, as Martin Luther King did, to understand and to comprehend and replace that violence, that stain of bloodshed that is spread across our land with an effort to understand, compassion, and love. We can do well in this country. We will have difficult times. We've had difficult times in the past, but we will have difficult times in the future. It is not the end of violence. It is not the end of lawlessness, and it's not the end of disorder. But the vast majority of white people and the vast majority of black people in this country want to live together, want to improve the quality of our life, and want justice for all human beings that abide in our land. And dedicate ourselves to what the Greeks wrote so many years ago, to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. Let us dedicate ourselves to that and say a prayer for our country and for our people. Thank you very much.